My body felt like just a shell. There was something coming out of my body, and I was rising above myself. I remember I was very aware. I was saying to myself, but look at that, what are you doing? And then I was saying to myself, but I don't want to go too far, because I could feel that my feet were above me. I was telling myself, but I mustn't forget where to come back in so I can return to my body. I
found myself as if in a cosmos with all these stars, different colors. And I found myself there, with no sound at all, total silence. I
saw a whole panorama with beings moving around. When one of them left the group to approach me, I was delighted. I thought to myself that maybe there would be an exchange, a communication with him. And indeed, that's what happened.
A journey between two worlds, universal and described throughout the ages, near-death experiences both fascinate and disturb. Since the 1970s, faced with countless testimonies, scientists have continued to try to unravel this mystery. We are in the region of Reims. Véronique has an appointment with her general practitioner. It took a relationship of trust to develop before she could tell him about her extraordinary experience, her near-death experience, known as an NDE. It happened as a result of an aneurysm, a blocked vein in the brain.
Hello.
And furthermore, moving on to the next point.
Rushed to the hospital, she spent 12 days in a coma. I
wake up in the hospital with a strange feeling. It's like watching yourself. And actually, I was beside myself. That is to say,
you saw from the outside what was happening. It was
outside my body. I saw myself, I saw lots of machines. And then there was I don't call it a light, I call it a brightness. But something that's very bright, very clear. And you feel like going towards it, because you know you're going to feel good. It's very golden, it sparkles a lot. And above all, you see shadows, some shadows that appear, that disappear, voices. But gentle voices, everything is soft. Whereas on the other side, you still hear harsh things. A pair of scissors about to fall, a shout because they need to put in an IV, and you feel both sensations. That's what's really impressive.
If I understand correctly, it was like two
worlds that
overlapped.
That overlap, exactly. Having
experienced an NDE, Véronique is what we call an experiencer. A home care worker, she had never heard of it, nor of the phenomenon of out-of-body experiences before it happened to her. There
are no images, there are shadows, but no visible people. But you recognize them, you hear them. For me, they were the deceased. It was my grandmother with whom I was very close, and it was my father whom I had just lost. I think it had barely been 3 years. I felt like my grandmother especially wanted me to understand that it wasn't my time, that I had to go back. Who knows what would have happened after? If you go further into the light, does that mean that's when, well, that's death actually, it's over. I don't know. But anyway, we came back.
You seem disappointed to me.
I'd like to go back from time to time. I really would. The
time has passed. Yet her journey to the edge of death still raises questions for her. I have
witnessed my own resurrection, my rebirth. It's kind of extraordinary. Is that even possible? Is it real? Do we really leave our bodies? But what is it that leaves our bodies? Is it the soul, or is it something else that leaves and lets us see ourselves?
What you experienced is called a near-death experience.
Yes.
One thing is certain, it's something real that exists. And what we also know for sure, thanks to current scientific research, is that these are not hallucinations. You're not crazy, you didn't dream it. What we don't know at this point is why it happens, why and how.
Dr. François Lallier is a specialist in near-death experiences. He dared to devote his medical thesis to this unusual topic and received praise from the jury, which attests to the seriousness of his research and marks a shift in attitudes on this issue.
The number of people who have had a near-death experience is actually enormous. And according to studies in the United States, it was found that it was maybe about 5% of the population. That was based on studies from the 1970s. In Germany, they found it was about 4%. My own work on adult general medicine patients also showed 4%. And it's true that, for example, in France, that would roughly represent the population of Paris proper, who would have experienced this. That is to say, everyone has someone in their circle who has had a near-death experience. It's inevitable. But on the other hand, not everyone talks about it. And since it's a taboo, very often people aren't aware of it. And I think that's what absolutely needs to be done, to take the drama out of this experience and talk about it.
Is it important for you to be able to talk about it with your doctor?
Yes. Yes, it was important because he was the first person who listened to me. Whereas before, I had been judged. People often told me I was crazy. When you're dead, you're dead. When you're alive, you're alive. But you can't be dead and alive at the same time.
Are you convinced that this patient had a near-death experience? Or could there be some doubt? What is the difference between this and a mystical hallucination or dreams?
So, first of all, the elements of the account, because near-death experiences are characterized by a certain number of features, such as seeing a light that is often described as brilliant but not blinding, which is a bit of a paradox. It is also characterized by seeing deceased loved ones, a life review, or simply seeing one's own body from the outside, and above all, an extremely strong feeling of peace and well-being, a loss of the sense of time. There can also be a sensation of knowing everything, of understanding everything about the world, about nature, and so on. So there are really some quite specific features which are found in the scales.
In 1983, the American psychiatrist Bruce Grayson was the first to create a scale, that is, a system to evaluate NDEs. A professor at the University of Virginia, he is one of the world's leading specialists. Made up of a series of questions, this tool makes it possible to determine whether it is truly a near-death experience. Here are a few examples. Did you feel separated from your body? Did it seem to you that you entered another world, an immaterial world? Did you see scenes from the future? Researchers consider that a minimum score of 7 out of 32 is required to confirm an NDE. We are in Liège at the Coma Science Group, one of the 2 largest university research centers in Europe on NDEs. Here, the team uses this scale for their scientific studies. They have also recently added new criteria, the ineffable nature of the experience and negative emotions. At the head of this laboratory, neurologist Stephen Lorice is trying to unravel the mystery of what happens in the brain during an NDE using modern technology.
It's fascinating to see how, when you have a cardiac arrest with no more blood supply, there can still be such intense and detailed perceptions and emotions. For now, no one knows what happens in the brain during a near-death experience. We're just trying to make progress in a complicated field by listening to people and conducting our measurements without any strong dogmatic preconceptions. That is to say, for everyone here at the Liège University Hospital who survives intensive care, we ask the question, did you have any memories? And if so, we really try to better understand and then as quickly as possible use these amazing machines to take images that might allow us to detect small scars and test our hypotheses.
Discovering traces in the brain following an NDE is exactly what Professor Lorius is investigating. Because it's impossible to place electrodes when someone is in a life-threatening emergency, and that's the main challenge of research in this field. However, various international studies have reached the same conclusion. 10 to 15% of people who survived a cardiac arrest remember having an NDE. These figures have been confirmed by the recent work of Dr. Lalia.
My thesis was innovative in the sense that my goal was to explore the patient's medical history, their surgical history, and the medications they were taking beforehand to see if we could find an explanation related to their previous health condition. with the initial assumption that if we consider the near-death experience as a hallucination, we would probably find more near-death experiences among people with psychiatric histories or psychiatric illnesses. If the near-death experience is an electrical anomaly, like an epileptic seizure, we would probably find more people who have had this experience among those with neurological problems. So that was the initial assumption. What I was able to show is that the opposite was true. That is, people with psychiatric and neurological histories tended to have fewer near-death experiences than those without such histories. So, in fact, the explanation regarding these histories might be that they alter the brain's ability to remember the experience.
Thus, neither medication nor psychiatric illnesses are the cause of the phenomenon. Moreover, proper brain function is necessary to remember the NDE. At the end of his study, Dr. Lallier came to a truly thought-provoking hypothesis. One
of the assumptions and one of the conclusions of my thesis is that everyone has a near-death experience during cardiac arrest, but not everyone remembers it. For example, children have a memory capacity that is exemplary compared to people who are older. And we see in cases of cardiac arrest that about 60% of children remember their near-death experience after the cardiac arrest, whereas it's only 15% of adults. You
heard that right. Children are 4 times more likely to have memories of an NDE. Lucas is one of the adults who remembers it. At 45, he survived being struck by lightning. His wife and he both remember the accident.
I gathered the photos. There's even a newspaper article. A man survives being struck by lightning. And that's you. You remember. A beautiful place. This is the lamp that wasn't struck by lightning, and then the one that was. The marks on the ceiling, everything is melted. How lucky that the cabin didn't catch fire. I was with my family on an alpine pasture at 2,200 meters altitude in the Val d'Hérens. It was evening and a storm rolled in, and you could really feel it was quite a powerful storm. And actually lightning struck right in front of the cabin. Even though I was standing in the doorway, it got me as it passed by. And so I was struck by lightning. Lena was shouting, "Papa, Papa." Then I saw that he was on the ground. At first I thought he was just fooling around, but I quickly realized it was something else. First, to see if he was breathing a little, he was breathing just a tiny bit. Afterwards, I don't know why, I lifted up his sweater, and that's when I saw the lightning mark drawn on his... And I realized that we had been struck by lightning, and then there was like an explosion and he was burned. So I had no idea if his brain was still functioning, but in any case, he was breathing. No, he was very far away, very far away.
Lucas was in a coma for 30 minutes. It took 2 hours before the emergency services arrived and he was airlifted to Sion Hospital.
He left in a tiny little night helicopter. He left, and then afterwards, we all hugged each other. We both started to cry, uncontrollably. In the space between them, right here.
Between life and death, Lucas touches nirvana while his family was mourning him. That was 24 years ago, yet the memories of his near-death experience are intact. This is one of the well-known characteristics of the phenomenon. It felt exactly like I was diving deep into a warm bath of sparkling particles, just like that. Tiny atoms that shine brilliantly, but all in perfect harmony with each other, yet somehow without any physical dimension. There was absolutely no dimension, no weight at all, no sense of up or down, and no passage of time. But everything was in complete harmony. Everything was in a profound and beautiful connection. Everything was interconnected. And then I saw a small silhouette of a boat moving forward in this world.
And I felt that this boat, which was faintly outlined, was also made of particles and was connected to the other particles around it. There was a kind of harmony, a kind of extraordinary peace. There was no duality, there was no self. It was, I think, just my consciousness that had gone to that place. It's very hard to imagine because we live in time, we live in a dimension, we have a body, and all of that no longer existed. And it was only particles. And it was an extraordinary memory because it was truly a happiness like I had never experienced before. It was perfect.
Some people experience a boundary that must not be crossed. For others, you must not cross the river that separates the world of the living from that of the dead, as in mythology.
There something had happened. This boat was moving forward. It was luminous. A boat was coming from that side. It was black. It latched onto the other one. There was a struggle to hold on. Suddenly it happened. And then it pulled me out of that luminous world of particles. So there really was a struggle to reintegrate myself into the body so that I wouldn't leave, probably, maybe for good. It's something powerful that I experienced because I've never felt such a strong sense of harmony and of this other world that's so different from ours. I thought, wow, there's really something amazing here. If
Each NDE is unique, many elements are recurring, such as a feeling of well-being never experienced before. It was not until the very next day that Lucas's concerned family members were finally able to visit him at the hospital.
The person taking care of Lucas was a friend, so I said, I'm here to see Lucas. Oh, he's your husband? We don't know why he's alive, but in any case, he made it through, as they say. Yeah.
quite an adventure, huh?
Burned and with his body swollen, Lucas spends several days in intensive care. When he joins his family at the cabin, he experiences a sensation he had never felt before. The
Night I was lying in bed, I remember that I left my body. It's incredible. I tried it again a little. I kind of practiced going out and coming back in. And at the same time I thought, hey, the fontanelle opening or whatever it was had happened and was still there. And I thought, yeah, I don't have much experience with this. I don't want to overuse the expression. But I felt that I was fragile. There was something, I was suddenly connected to an entirely different world.
out-of-body experiences, that is, the ability to leave one's body at will, seem to develop among experiencers, increasing from 8 before an NDE to 49 after. It took Lucas more than a year to physically recover from his burns and his NDE, because those strange sensations lasted a long time.
I would put my hand on my sternum. It was as if I was next to myself. I wasn't in my body, as if there were two bodies. It honestly took a massive, exhausting amount of mental willpower and deep concentration just to begin to accept this jarring disconnect between my actual physical body and my internal sense of self, or this strange, unsettling feeling of being completely out of sync, as if I were hovering somewhere entirely outside my own physical form for a long time. I went to see traditional doctors for a while. They told me to take medication. I said that I didn't want to take medication.
Feeling lost, Lucas goes to see a nurse who practices energy healing.
When I went to see her after the accident, she immediately said, "Oh my, what's happening to you? You're completely outside your body." And I said, "Oh yes, I know, I can feel it." Then she said, "Listen, I'm going to try to put you back together." And then I went to see her 3 or 4 times, and I felt that the two bodies were coming back together, one over the other. I just felt good again. Afterwards, I realized, yes, great, that thing that was next to me is back in my body again. This experience of going into that other world, at least for me, was always stronger than anything else that happened. If I can get as close as possible to that light, to those feelings, to those, I don't know if it's like atoms or particles and all that, with my art. So then I tell myself that if I worked with fire.
As a visual artist, Lucas has never stopped since his NDE, trying to reproduce in his works the light he experienced. In what way is this description of the elsewhere different from a dream or a hallucination?
Maybe it is of the exact same category and nature, but the evocation is so extraordinarily powerful and incredibly intense that they manifest as vivid and profound dreams. There is something that has truly been imprinted. I definitely feel that I have that deep down inside of me. It's in my cells. It's omnipresent. There's something that survives. There's something that is unalterable.
Researchers have identified that memories of NDEs differ from real or imaginary memories because the intensity remains. They are richer in emotions and sensory information. They have nothing to do with the confusion and agitation of hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen. In the scientific world, the phenomenon of near-death experiences is poorly regarded and often disparaged. Why such distrust?
It's a taboo in the scientific community because it's something that is already not understood. In the scientific world, people don't like what they don't understand. And it's even worse, I think, in the medical field. But that's how we're trained in our studies. It's a taboo also because it perhaps touches on religious dogmas, since the feeling of well-being experienced during a near-death experience, the light, the beings of light, sometimes the somewhat paradisiacal world that is lived, evokes paradise. Some patients will say they met Jesus, met God, met Allah, or met whoever it may be. And the problem with that is it puts off a lot of doctors. Because for them, near-death experiences come from religions. But all studies agree that regardless of a person's beliefs, everyone can have a near-death experience and at the same frequency. That is to say, religion does not explain this factor.
Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel is the world authority on NDEs. In 2001, he published a landmark study in the prestigious scientific journal The Lancet. At the time, his research shook the medical community because it showed that one can be conscious during a period when all brain functions have ceased. He became interested in the phenomenon somewhat by chance. He was a young doctor in 1969 when cardiopulmonary resuscitation was just beginning to be practiced. I
looked after a patient who had suffered a cardiac arrest. After several defibrillations, he regained consciousness. The resuscitation team and I were very happy. It was all new to us. But the patient himself seemed very, very disappointed to wake up. He told us about a tunnel, a light, music, and beautiful landscapes. This was well before the now well-known term NDE. That's how I started to take an interest in it. Because we had always been taught at university that consciousness was the result of brain function. So it should have been impossible to have an expanded consciousness experience while being unconscious due to a lack of blood circulation and a lack of breathing. People in cardiac arrest are clinically dead. If resuscitation is not started within 5 to 10 minutes, they die. This is the very initial beginning stage of the natural process of passing away.
His curiosity is piqued. 20 years later, Pim van Lommel launched the first major prospective study, that is, a long-term study comparing two groups of patients. He followed 344 cardiac arrest survivors for 8 years. In 1988,
we began a prospective study in 10 Dutch hospitals to see if we could find explanations for the causes and content of near-death experiences. we discovered that 18% of patients reported having had an NDE, while this was not the case for 82%. We then compared the two groups, those who had memories of an NDE and those who did not after their cardiac arrest. We compared the duration of the cardiac arrests. Whether it was 2 minutes or 8 minutes, it made no difference. The duration of unconsciousness, whether 5 minutes of unconsciousness or 3 weeks in a coma, had no impact. A simple or complicated cardiopulmonary resuscitation with intubation and lots of medication also made no difference. In
other words, the severity of the trauma and injuries is not what determines the occurrence of an NDE. And that's not all. In our busy daily lives,
study, we were able to rule out lack of oxygen to the brain, anoxia, severe anoxia, as an explanation for one of the causes of NDEs because there was no difference between the two groups.
how is it that you can be so absolutely certain that it's not just a mere figment of a dream or a vivid hallucination?
Well, in order to actually have a hallucination, or even a complex dream, you really need a functioning brain. But during cardiac arrest, the brain no longer functions. So by definition, it can't be a hallucination, an illusion, a delirium, or a dream. In
his study, Pim van Lommel was also able to question the commonly cited causes: endorphins, adrenaline, neurotransmitters, carbon dioxide, because none of these hypotheses fully explains the phenomenon. Near-death experiences can occur during accidents, difficult childbirths, drownings, long illnesses, or even surgeries that go wrong. That's what happened to Patricia 16 years ago. A mother of 5, this down-to-earth woman from Jura runs a business with her husband. At 39, while undergoing a routine surgical procedure, she had a fatal allergic reaction and suffered 2 cardiac arrests. She was placed in an induced coma for 5 days. Dennis, her husband, tells us how the doctors informed him that things were not going as planned.
I hear and eventually come to understand that there were a few minor complications. And at some point, it's more than that. I realize it's serious because they tell me that my wife has died. I
Very strangely found myself above my own body. And then I saw myself. For the first time, I recognized myself. It took me a moment to recognize myself. And I saw myself completely hooked up, intubated. But I definitely recognized myself. And I saw myself for the first time, but in a strange state. And I thought to myself, what am I doing? And by the time I asked myself that, I was already somewhere else. I revisited and replayed my entire life in a loop. I was hovering over that life, as if someone was showing me my life as a movie. And then I went somewhere else. I was energy. I was actually a star,